Alrighty, so just to kick things off, I'd like to start with the acknowledgement of country. I respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, this space where we are meeting this evening. The Menang people have been here on this Noongar Budja for thousands of years. The connection they share with this place we call the Great Southern runs generations deep. It is with respect that I acknowledge the Menang people and their elders, past, present, and emerging. It is a privilege to be here, to live here, and to learn here. Thank you all for coming this evening.
Lisa, can I just add my own comments on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I often hear people giving welcomes to country like that, but some I can put it like I spent 10 years living with very traditional people in the Northern Territory, and it's not just sort of words for me. The sort of things that they showed me and taught me resonate through everything that I write, even many years afterwards. So I echo your thoughts of my respects and love to the people upon whose land I am now and upon whose land I was for many years.
Thank you, Adrian. What area are you at the moment, where you live?
Oh, I'm living in Victoria, up in the hills up northeast of Melbourne, in an area not unlike I describe in the book.
Oh, beautiful.
When it's not on fire, it's beautiful. Yeah.
Yes, and when you're not freezing as well.
Yeah, that's right. I live in a big old drafty mud brick house, a bit like the blue house that I describe in the book, and it's very drafty in winter, that's for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. And just quickly for the recording, there will be spoilers. So if you have not read the book and you're not a fan of spoilers, click away and come back later. That's your warning, video watchers. Alrighty, so cracking straight on into it, Adrian, I'd love to hear a little bit about your history. What was young Adrian like? What was your relationship to reading?
Right. Well, first thing I should say, I grew up sort of in the housing commission house in the most working class part of Melbourne, and books weren't very on the outer western suburbs. A place called Laverton, on the off chance that I suppose you've heard of Laverton in West Australia, haven't you? But I grew
There's
up
a few nods in the audience.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I noticed Laverton featured in a news article I read a few years ago listing the worst suburbs in Melbourne, and Laverton had the honour to be number one, the worst place in Melbourne. And it was the article was illustrated by a photo of a house with a big sort of cyclone fence with barbed wire and a nasty dog, and this funny little house, a little concrete house with a fridge on the roof. No, not a fridge, a couch on the roof. That's right. So I don't know what that was meant to illustrate, but that was typically where I grew up. But so books weren't really a part of that world out there. Comics were more my go, and playing sport, I'd say.
Yeah.
And I don't come from a family that's particularly into books. Maybe as a writer, the most informative experience for me was at the school. I went to a Catholic school, and this little box there was no library to speak, or no library at all there. I mean, I started in year 7. But they wanted to set one up, and a box of books came in from America or somewhere, and the teacher asked me to help unpack the boxes, and to thank me, he gave one to me. In fact, said I could take my pick, and without even knowing what it was, I picked up the collected works of all the Sherlock Holmes short stories, and novels too.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I've still got that book. It's still one of my favourite books, and maybe that set me on a life of crime that I've followed since.
Exactly, yeah. Imagine if you'd picked up, a romance.
Well.
And what about your writing journey? How did you come to embark on that?
Yeah, well, I really got into literature of all sorts in a big way by about, I suppose, 15. I read a lot of people like, I suppose reading Shakespeare at school was a big influence on me, reading King Lear. And I just had a really vivid sense, like I grew to love literature and poetry very quickly. I had a sort of like for me, reading poetry was like I've got this sort of sense of synesthesia. I sort of see words as colours and so on. And
Beautiful.
yeah,
I'm jealous of that.
sorry.
I'm a bit jealous of that.
Oh well, yeah, that's right. But it gets a bit confused. I mean, I'm going to uni and reading Coleridge, Rime of the Ancient Mariner and Commodus on the amazing colours and things flowing through it. And I remember no one else seemed to know what I was talking about, so it was a bit, just one of the little side attractions of literature for me. But I suppose by about 15, I was trying to write poetry, and then I went off to uni, into Melbourne Uni, where I did an arts degree, and I just started doing law, but I dropped the law pretty quickly, and then I just grew to love all sorts of writers. I read very widely. And this was back in the 70s when university was for free to sort of hang around there. So I hang around and did a master's, and read very, very, very widely. Yes, but then I think, yeah, when I graduated in 1980, I finished up that, and I'd got a bit in interest. I'd been up to the Territory once or twice with visiting friends up there, and visited a place called Utopia, if anyone's ever heard of that station, quite a famous.
Has anyone heard of Utopia Station? Yes,
North,
yeah, quite a few
yeah,
nods in the audience there.
yeah, northeast of Alice Springs. A friend of mine was sort of starting up an arts program there. I was interested in that world. And so when I graduated from uni, I was with my girlfriend at the time. We went and lived up there, which is my wife now. We went and lived up there and worked in, with First Nations people for about 10 years. We were there. So we had that really amazing experience of spending time. Particularly, I was based in Tennant Creek for a long spell, and I would cover particularly the communities out west of there in the Tanami. And those are people who often hadn't even seen white people until they were in their 30s. So they had a really remarkable way of looking at the world, which has never left me. And it's infused everything that I write to this day.
I was going to ask about that actually, with the reference to the Walpiri trackers in
Yeah,
the
well,
novel as well.
I did mention that comment, didn't I? Yeah, I actually did. I'm not sure. Have you read the previous novel? No
I
offense.
must admit, I haven't. I did flip through it, and we actually had a few members in the audience who read Canticle Creek, absolutely loved it. Went back. Read Wiregrass, loved it. Went back and read Canticle Creek. So we do have a few members in the audience who did.
Yeah, no offense taken. I probably wouldn't have read it myself if I hadn't written it. But then I describe that world a bit in Canticle Creek. Sort of starts off and finishes off in that world. But I haven't really lived there for it's getting up to 30 years now. I wrote 2 books about that world, but it's sort of fading in my memory. And when I go back now, it's always within. That seems to be the people I knew are dying, and things are pretty bad. And some of the things that I thought I'd hoped would be positive there's been a lot of negative things happen to some of the communities that I knew. So some positive things as well.
Do you see yourself ever moving back there?
We talk about it. I don't know if we can handle the heat anymore. We lived there. We lived in terribly hot houses and never had air conditioning. Now I live in a drafty old mud brick house without proper heating. So we must have some sort of resilience in us. But we go back there for visits from time to time. And Kristen, my wife, is a midwife, and she loved working in that sort of place, in that sort of environment. So a few years ago, we were up there. Well, actually, when she first started there as a young nurse out in one of the communities, she had to rush into town with a woman who was about to have a baby, and she had the baby on the side of the highway. It was 30 years ago. When we were back up there about 10 years ago, we were camping next to this young Indigenous couple with their bunch of kids sort of camping just near us. And we went and got chatted, and Kristen realised that the young man there was the baby she delivered on the side of the road 30 years or 30
Oh,
years earlier.
incredible. How did
Yeah.
she realise?
I
Was it
just
the name or?
she always remembered the name of the mother, and then just got chatting, and she realised who the mother was, and that was one of the stories that had come down through his family that had been born on the side of the road
Yeah.
with a panicky, no, with a nervous young nurse delivering him.
Oh, that's amazing that you
Yeah,
found your way back to each other as well. That really
yeah,
that community.
yeah.
So with your inclusion of First Nation characters and the references that you've had in the Wiregrass, how much of that is, would you say, inspired by your experiences versus maybe research into more recent events?
Uh, Sometimes more recent events come into it fleetingly, but really everything I write about that world is, well, I've never really done much in the way of formal research there. I just know and love that world. It's still, even all these years later, those are still the most formative years of my life. And I've got a lot of stories. I know it's sort of not very accepted for a white fella to write about them anymore, so I don't so much, but just sort of tangentially, as I've done with the Wiregrass and Canticle Creek. So it doesn't really feature strongly in my books now, but it's sort of there as an undercurrent, as it is in my life.
Yeah, beautiful. And what about the crime element with you have a lot of characters that are involved in the police force. How did you go about researching and coming up with those very colourful characters?
Yeah, you mean the policeman?
Yes.
Oh, right. Well, actually, yeah, in some ways, I come from a part of the world and a part of society that hasn't got great relationships with the police. Back when I was at uni, they were arresting us and stuff like that for getting involved in protests and things.
Does tend to poison relations.
Yeah, and I've got a daughter who sort of seems to have gone the same way. She's always getting arrested for being involved in anti-Adani protests and things like that. But no, look, we live in a small community. Particularly, I'm a member of the volunteer fire brigade, and we work a lot with the police. And one of my good friends is a police officer named Roger Wood, who was the police officer in charge of Kinglake, which is just north of us, Kinglake, on Black Saturday. And I wrote a book called Kinglake 350, which was sort of a non-fiction, or was a non-fiction book, based on his experiences of that day. He was like the officer in charge of Kinglake, which was the worst hit area on the Black Saturday fires in 2009. So yeah, I know quite a few police now, and we have quite good relationships with them.
Yeah. What's the craziest stories you've heard from them?
The things that they do.
Yeah.
Uh,
Funny arrest?
Sorry.
Funny arrest?
Well, I remember the fellow that wrote the book about funny arrest, but that I was talking to Roger a year or two after that first book came out, and he was off arresting green protesters at an anti-logging protest, and the people there had all read my book. My wife was there as a protester, I think, and he told me that Roger told me that when people realised who he was, they're all sort of coming up, and as he's arresting them, they're all sort of shaking his hand and giving him a pat across the back and so on. He was a very amicable sort of fellow, I should say, too. Probably a pleasure to be arrested by him, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. If you had to get arrested, it's the way to go.
But when we're with the fire brigade, we often work with the police. They work very closely.
Yeah, I did particularly love your inclusion of all of the sort of volunteers in the community and how that makes rural communities really run, whether it's the fire brigade, FDS, ambulance. Because it's very much the same, I think, where we live. We are so lucky that we have fantastic volunteers within our community, and it's definitely something that I imagine would be the same within yours.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're really appreciated, and I think that particularly in the fire brigade, the CFA we call it over here. But yeah, I mean, we're all very closely connected to the community, and we tend to sort of use our local knowledge to stop things happening before they get out of hand. I actually had a turnout just as I was sitting around waiting for this call, but
Oh,
didn't go.
we appreciate it. That would have been a very different video recording.
You're live cross from the back of the truck or something.
Yeah, exactly. And within that remote community as well, your criminal element. I was saying to a few of the audience members, I definitely wouldn't want to live in Tentacle Creek.
No.
Seems like a bit of a hotbed of crime. Would you say that?
Yeah. There's one, yeah, there's one thing about living in those small, like when I living in those small towns. How can I put it? You get like before I moved up to the territory, I lived like I was at uni for years, and I lived in sort of shared houses around in Carlton and places like that. And you develop a sort of a way of looking at the world. Sort of you imbibe it from your colleagues and friends, but when I went up to live in, or particularly Tennant Creek, which is, I remember we hadn't been there. We just sort of moved into a new house, and we got all one afternoon, not long after that, we got sort of all spruced up, ready to go for a little walk around and meet the neighbours and check out the neighbourhood and so on. And we had our cute little dog who was a bit like what's the dog's name in Legally Blonde? Bruiser, I think. Yeah, the little
Yeah, that's the one.
was it Bruce? Anyway, we had a cute little dog, and we stepped that onto the front, onto the footpath, and immediately this massive pig dog from our neighbours bounded over the fence, leapt onto our dog, had him down on the ground with his head on his throat. And it looked like he was killing him. And my wife sort of started screaming, and she grabbed him tried to prise his jaws apart, and she got bitten. And then I was trying to kick him and send her to put my back out. And the owner, who looked even more like a pig dog than his dog did, came running out and joined in the fight. And then he began bashing the dog. And then he picked up a lump of concrete and tried smashing it, but it still wouldn't let go of our little dog, and finally grabbed the garden hose, blocked off the dog's nostrils, and shoved the hose all the way down its throat. And only then did the dog let go of our little dog. And then a minute later, we were sort of staggering back home with a sore back and bloodied hands, and what we thought was a dead dog. And it recovered. We rushed it off to the vet. But I remember thinking, this is a different sort of world we've got ourselves into than Carlton.
Yeah, welcome to town.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you'll be riding him round for Christmas dinner.
No. But the thing about small towns is that you get every level of society and every type of humanity all living in the same little towns and in the same little areas, and they're sort of forced to interact and get along. It does create some interesting scenarios. Plenty of scope for crime there too.
Yeah, definitely. And you do end up just lumping along together, don't you? Depending.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And with sort of the pub, the bakery, all of that sort of setting, did you have any sort of direct oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, the word direct inspiration for those? We know that every small town, the pub's the cornerstone of the town, and the markets on a Saturday and things like that. Paint us a picture there.
I don't know if anyone in the audience knows St Andrews, which is where I live, but did anyone, any heads going nodding? No. We've got a beautiful old pub here, and where I go every afternoon. Not to drink. I don't drink at all hardly, but I drink. I just sort of our house is a bit crowded, so I go down there and sit in the corner and read a book, or go. I tend to scribble out things in the morning, then go over them in the afternoon.
Do a bit of people watching.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. And as for bakeries, one of the big, my daughter has just sort of, she's a high school teacher, she's just come home from England, and she and her partner have started up a little sourdough bakery in our house. So
Excellent. Excellent. I'd be the size of the house.
Yeah.
Product testing right here.
We're getting that way. No, not really, but it's tempting sometimes. And they sort of make the bread and cakes and things here and sell it at the local markets.
Excellent. I did think that's one thing that I really differed with Jessie about. I absolutely would put up with the sounds of 3 a.m. baking
Yeah.
to be living above a bakery. I would not want to be living in the cold in a building where the roof leaked. I would absolutely trade sleepless nights for baked goods.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got the leaky roofs as well, actually. But yeah, that when Sally, my daughter, she read that reference to the bakery noises at 3 o'clock in the morning. She said, "I hope we haven't been keeping you awake at 3," because they do get up. They get
She
up.
took that one personally.
Well, I said no. I was happy. I like having them live here. It's kind of fun. But yeah, I said no, don't worry. But yeah, she did think I was referring to it. But we do hear a lot of sort of. It's all hand kneaded, so it's sort of hear the thump as they fling the logs down on the board and so on.
Yeah, bash it about a bit.
Yeah, they do. I think each loaf has to be kneaded 3 times for several minutes each knead. That's a
Yeah,
huge job they do, and they start at
very
2.
strong forearms.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And you've just touched on earlier with, sitting in the pub, doing a bit of reading, maybe a bit of scribbling, a bit of people watching.
Yeah.
What rituals
Yeah.
do you have for your writing? Do you have any rituals that you must do for you to be able to write?
No, not really. I wish I did. Look, when something is when I've got a book sort of bubbling around in my mind, it's really there all the time. I don't do anything else. Even when I'm out going for a walk or something or chopping wood, I'm often thinking about what to do. But I'm not greatly disciplined. I try and write, but write as often. I try and do some sort of writing every day, but I'm not as committed as some people are. Like I know my friend Gary Disher, who I presume a lot of your people, their audience will know. Yeah, he's a friend of mine, but I know he tells me he just starts every morning at 8 o'clock and just seems to write all morning and has a really incredibly well developed plan of what he's going to write worked out. I'm sort of the opposite of all that. I'm a bit more sporadic, which is why it took me about 100 years to get going.
Fair enough. So when someone says to you, are you a plotter or a pantser? What would you reply to them?
I would say I see.
Constantly plotting in the back of your mind, pantsing it as to when it gets down on the page?
Well, no. Yeah, I would say, if you, how can I put it? Like, that it's a spectrum, but from plot, you got the plotters and the pantsers. I'd be for the most part, I'm up at the pantsers end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
So go out there, saddle up your horse, take a few days' supply of food and water and blankets, and keep going. And eventually, you'll sort of get out to where I approach my writing.
Fair.
I know my second novel, which is called Gunshot Road, it sort of began with the sort of dream I had of this big rock formation out in the middle of the desert. And I really spent, I'd written and I spent that book trying to work out what that was all about. And I spent probably half the writing of the book, and I still didn't really know what was going on, what significance it had. It just sort of blended in later.
Yeah. How do you find your writing process, inspiration process has changed from, book 1 to book 5?
Yeah, the first 2 books were probably easier because they were about a world that I was really desperate to convey to the wider world. I felt like working in that, what I thought was the most interesting place in Australia, which was Central Australia, which had been surprisingly neglected by writers. I think, considering all of what's going on here. I mean, the publishers all seem to they'd rather sort of publish the latest angst-ridden personal memoir by an ABC announcer than some sort of original. I think, but I suppose I was sort of exploding with things that I wanted to try and share with a wider world for that first book, and less so for the second, but still the same. the third book I wrote was a story sort of given to me by the events, the bushfire of Black Saturday, which was a non-fiction book. And the last two, I don't know how to describe it. I'm sort of, yeah, I try and sort of work out more. Like I feel like I've learned some skills about plotting and learning how to develop characters and so on. But I still find it an awful struggle. It doesn't really, for me, it doesn't get any easier as I get older. In fact, it gets harder. I worry I've used up all my best jokes in the earlier books, but I don't recall any jokes at all in the Wiregrass, maybe one or two. But yeah, I just try to. I suppose to me, the main thing is to try and make sure that, like, I don't really think in terms of even stories or even characters so much. I tend to think in terms of sentences. Okay. And I like a good, remember I said earlier, I've got this sort of synesthetic approach to language. And I really like a sentence that's sort of got a physical feel to me. And that's the sort of thing that I try and develop most now, which makes no sense to 99% of readers, but that's what I try and do.
That it makes the love of poetry definitely make a lot of sense though for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, poetry. I mean, it's what I wrote for years. And never with any great success. I published in small magazines and things like that, but never had particularly coming from a place like Laverton, I never really had the confidence to share. Like I published poems in quite a few of the major magazines and things, but never really tried to put a book together. But still, it's that love of language. And I suppose if people ask me who my favourite Australian writer is these days, I would probably say your fellow West Australian John Kinsella.
Yeah.
I think he's one of the great poets writing in the English language today. I think. I mean, I was looking at a poem he wrote recently. I don't remember the name of it, but it was on that book. It was in that book, which was it called something like Dante's Inferno or something. It was sort of a bit of a riff off Dante, anyway. And he had this. I mean, I'm presuming your audience will know him there. I presume half the books on your shelves are by him.
Yeah, we've definitely got quite a chunk in the poetry section.
Yeah, but I was looking at this, and he was just this poem, and he was describing a solar panel which was left leaning against, I think it was the bonnet of a car in the sunset, and just the afterglow of the day's light was sort of still bouncing around the solar panels. And to me, not only was he describing it, but he was manifesting what he was looking at in his poetry, and that's such a rare skill. I love that in
Beautiful.
him. Yeah.
What about I noticed in the intro for both Cantricle Creek and the Wiregrass, you've got a poem by Kenji Takada.
Right. Yes.
And I tried Googling Kenji Takada, and I really struggled to have.
You will struggle. Kenji Takada is me. I just made them up. Yeah. Unless there's no such person.
Aha.
Yeah.
I did wonder when you're saying that you wrote poetry. I was like, oh,
yeah. I do a little bit of that still. And I just wrote. Well, I usually publish it under a false name for some reason, but as I did then too. No, he was the inspiration for like he was one of the characters more strongly in Cantricle Creek. I think like he's long dead now, but his resonance is still to be felt in the community. And yeah, he was a painter and a potter, and but Chinese or Asian. He was Japanese, but I lived. I've never been to Japan, but I did Chinese in my eternal arts degree. Did it for a couple of years, and then went and lived in China for a couple of years at different times.
Yeah.
So I love Chinese poetry and some Japanese poetry. Probably if I had to say my favorite poet in the world, it would be maybe a fellow called Miyazawa Kenji. Is he? Do you get to know him? Yeah, a poem called November the 3rd, I think it is one of the great poems. But And I grew up, I mean, not grew up, but I loved some Chinese poets like Li He is one, sort of the Chinese Keats, and Han Shan, Cold Mountain, another poet I really love. So and where I think with Takada, the sort of poet potter in the book that I've just written, I was a little bit inspired by that because one of my daughters is a potter, and she's working at a local, it's called an anagama kiln, like a wood-fired kiln. And that sort of just was my little way of slipping in a little bit of a homage to those great artists who've inspired me a lot in my life.
I don't know whether have you heard of Ocean Vuong?
Ocean what, sorry?
Ocean Vuong, Vuong.
V-O-N-G, is that Vietnamese?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I have, but
He's
I don't
beautiful.
know. So who is that Australian
No,
Vietnamese
I think he's
translation?
American Vietnamese. Pretty
Yeah,
sure.
I've
Um,
definitely seen the name.
yeah, absolutely
Yeah.
stunning. He's done a book and then 2 poetry collections, and I absolutely adore them. One of my favorite authors. Has anyone in the audience read any Ocean Vuong? Well, you've heard it here first.
Oh.
Check him out. I always keep him in stock. Yeah, very
Is
good.
the name first name just spelt the same as Ocean? O-C-E.
Yeah,
Oh, good. I'll check it out because I'm always looking for. I've just written it down here. Thanks for that.
excellent. Always good to be able to swap recommendations, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I know we've got plenty of Kinsella in stock. Because I don't know whether they've got a new volume coming out or he's getting referenced in something, but they reprinted all of his backlist, which was really good.
Oh,
It's all available again.
yeah. He writes them faster than I can read them. Actually, I don't know.
Yeah, and they are
Yeah.
massive. Like poetry collections are like that fat. Yeah,
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
value.
Yeah, no, he's a great writer. Sometimes he's a bit didactic for my tastes, but when he's manifesting things in language, I just think they're extraordinary.
So will we see any poetry collections from you, do you think? Or from
I
Kenji?
don't, maybe when I die, maybe a bit more from Takada. I don't know.
Yes, yeah.
I like putting a
We'll have to
little.
keep our eyes peeled for Takata.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, then we're sort of doing a bit of a loop back, but I don't want to miss out on talking about Jessie. She's such a strong protagonist. I'm sorry, I just need to double check. Emily Tempest from your first
Yeah,
series.
she was the first. Yeah, I seem to come up with these people. I don't know, the fiery
Yeah,
women. I don't know why. As I become a
yeah.
cold man, I
And
suppose.
very capable. Maybe we need to meet your wife.
You should say that again.
I said, maybe we need to meet your wife because they're
Oh,
often
yeah,
very capable.
she's a very feisty character. We love
Yeah,
her. I
she's
remember
fun.
I did a panel once with who was it, Michael Rowbotham and Alexander McCall Smith, and we'd all written strong female leads in the books together. And someone from the audience asked, um, could you all 3 of you tell us a bit about your family backgrounds? How come you've got these strong women? Have you all come from female dominated houses? And Alexander McCall Smith gave a description of him he had, and Michael had, I think he had 2 daughters and a very fiery wife, and he had, and then it was my son. Yes, I've got myself at the time. I had myself, my 2 daughters, my mother-in-law, horse, 2 dogs, bunch of chickens, all females. I said there was just me and the rooster, and my wife chopped his head off.
That was a warning shot.
Keep in line.
So do you feel that your familial background is part of the reason why you have such strong female characters? Will we see sort of more female characters from you like that in your future works, or do you think you'll have a few more male leads?
I've really got no idea. I've got, I think that, you know, that I just had Emily Tempest in my first 2 novels. She was kind of based on someone who was a good friend of mine who passed away not long after we left there. Actually, it was sort of a bit of a homage to her. But Yeah, I suppose, look, the only thing is I feel as in crime generally, I'm just, in fact, in life generally, I'm so sick of all that macho, male dominated. I mean, that was the sort of the traditional, the trope, I suppose, of crime novel. I know there's been some great female crime novels, particularly in the last 20 years or so, but it really is a pretty, it's a pretty, I don't know. It's in some ways, it's a world I don't like. It's so full of vengeance and violence. I suppose my books have got violence as well, but I just get so sick of it. Yeah, it's so. I was just thinking tonight of the fact we were listening to this talk where we all barrack for Melbourne Football Club in this house, and I was listening to something about them on the news tonight. But I was thinking how sad it is that there's never been an AFL footballer come out as gay, and how what a sort of brutal sort of world that is, and I'm just a bit over it really. So I suppose I wanted, as a crime writer, I was trying to have someone who's a little bit of an outsider, and in all four of my novels, that's the person's main characteristic, I suppose. They're female, yes, but they're also an outsider. I think being female is part of their reason why they work for me.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, very much lone wolves, aren't they?
They are, yeah, yeah. I may have a wussy man in one of my.
And what about with your auxiliary characters? Were there any that surprised you that were particularly difficult to write?
Oh, um, yeah, I wouldn't say a character really surprised me. Maybe the character of Nash, uh, Jesse's boyfriend in the most recent book, is a character that just sort of came out of nowhere. He's a little bit of yeah, he's a bit of an isolated sort of character, I suppose, and character I'm still getting to know a bit. I'm getting to know him more in the book that I'm struggling to write at present.
Okay, intriguing. And he was a beautiful character. He was very
Oh,
complex, especially as we, peeled back the layers of what his experiences were and, trying to
yeah.
figure out the truth of what maybe he had gone through and how that had influenced his actions. How did you decide to use a cult in part of your
Yeah.
novel? That feels like a big topic to wade into. What was the research like for that?
Yeah, I didn't do much research. One thing I should say, I mean, I'm sure, hopefully, most of your audience will have heard of the Family, who are a very strange cult in Victoria. People have heard of them.
Yeah, lots of yeses. I
Yeah,
haven't though. So
the
could you
ones that
take me to a bare bones explanation?
they're the group that people wrongly say Julian Assange was a member of, because the elders of the community dyed all the kids' hair white and so on.
Okay.
The genesis of the Wiregrass, I'm really pleased and glad that you found Nash a moving character, because he was for me. And I should say the book began, there was this really strange, well, I'll go back. There was a woman named Sarah, or Hamilton Burm was her name initially. She thought that was, although her name was actually Sarah Moore. She was a member of of this very strange cult, and she grew up in them. And when she was about, or in a senior high school, they were really cruelly treated and given, all this really strange things going on. But she escaped and called in the police and brought the whole cult down. And I found her. And then in the end, the cult was broken up by the police, and she was uh, sent off she was adopted by a family in the community, did really well at school, went on to become a doctor, but was still traumatized by her experiences in the family, and ended up in her 30s trying to commit suicide, and then dying as a result of the injury, eventually as a result of the injuries she'd inflicted upon herself. And I just found she was like, I knew a bit about the family, and she'd always struck me as an amazing person. to do what she did. And I just admired her so much, just coming from absolute nowhere like that. And well, not nowhere, but that's the wrong way to put it, but to be coming from such an oppressive background and having the courage to break out and tear it, pull it down, really moved me. So that was really the genesis. And in some ways, Nash, that was a little bit of the story that I gave to him. That was the genesis of his story, of him, really.
No, he was incredible. And I liked that you didn't sort of have it, oh, it's all fixed now. He's found someone, it's all fixed. It's all good now. I appreciated that you kept that nuance as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so will we see more of Nash, do you think?
Oh, yeah, I'm right in the middle of trying to write another book at present, although I'm finding it a bit heavy going, must admit. But I'm not sure what's going on. But I get a bit sort of I seem to go through these stages of being all over the place as I'm trying to hammer novels together. I sort of just scribble down thousands of, not thousands, but hundreds of pages of wild ideas and impressions and things, and then get a bit overwhelmed by them. So that's where I'm at now. Yeah, but I'm supposed to have the next one finished in about a year, so I better get a wriggle on.
Oh.
Yeah, he's definitely coming back. Yeah, he's still hanging around with Jessie, and they're having a good time together.
And will this be from his perspective, or will it?
Oh no, it's still being narrated by Jessie, and I don't even know that he'll get
another one from Jessie. Everybody, we did have someone ask.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, and you had sort of the cult in this one, but then you did have those other criminal elements that intertwined, and I loved that because I wasn't expecting you to do it. I sort of, as we were reading along, I was going, oh, he's a dud one, but wasn't expecting it to all be linked together.
I'm glad you weren't expecting it, because I worked really hard to give that, to sort of deliver it's a bit of a balancing act. You've got to deliver enough clues to make it fair for the reader, but you can't make it too obvious as well. And I suppose for I was a bit worried that anyone who knew me, as soon as they saw the mention of a cult, they'd automatically think that was they were going to be the villains. So I had to work hard to produce those other red herrings, all of whom were based on experiences of people I've known or had. Growing up in a town like Laverton, we had the obligatory pervert priest, and who I last saw as a kid, and next saw him being dragged off to jail on the front pages of the Melbourne Age 30 years later.
Yeah.
I met one or two swindlers and environmental vandals in my day as well.
Yeah. Did you have a villain that you personally loathed the most?
Loathed the most. They're all pretty bad. Maybe it's old Gwyn at the end. She was
nasty, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was. If you're look up a woman called, what was her name? Anna Hamilton Byrne, I think. Was that her name? Yeah, Anna was sort of the inspiration for her. She was the head person of that cult that I described, the family.
Okay, yeah. What about from our audience? Was there a particular villain that you sort of was like, yep, you got what you deserved, really didn't like you? Dirty cop. Yeah.
Oh yeah, but I think I was actually pretty gentle on the ball, wasn't I? Nobody got killed, did they? I'm trying to think. I don't think so.
Legs got shredded and, arrows to the back. And
there's the odd flesh wound, but nothing.
They all recovered.
They did. I was very, very. I think in my last couple of books, the villains copied in the end from memory. Funny, I'm so knee deep in what I'm trying to write now, a lot of the details of that last book I've forgotten about already, because I'm sort of really overwhelmed.
Moved on, you're immersed in a different narrative now.
I have, and I'm still thrashing these thousands of ideas, and I sort of forget whether this is something I've used in the last one or I'm working up for the next one.
Yeah. And how does that process sort of go? You have the million ideas, try and whack them out? Do you have a good editor or publicist that you work with, or do you kind of deliver them a relatively finished product?
I deliver them what I think is a relatively finished product. They don't always seem to agree. But I've changed my publishers in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And I've had a very I worked with Tex for a couple of years, and then Ultimo were very good to pick me up for this one, for these last few. Yeah, but no, they always seem to make lots of changes, and so often I suppose one of the things of becoming a bit more experienced is learning to have a bit more faith, or wishing I did have more faith in my own abilities.
Yeah.
When people tell me something's not working, alas, I tend to follow their advice. And well, like there's some changes I made to the character of Nash, who you just mentioned a minute ago, and I took them on advice from other different people, but in the end, I kind of regretted it. I felt a bit like he'd diminished a little bit as a person in my imagination. So I hope I'm learning to have confidence, but God knows who knows these things. It could be laughed out of town with my next book. I don't know.
Definitely not. You're drawing a line in the sand for this one. No.
Okay, thanks.
And so, with having to adjust Nash, one of the things that we love to hear authors talk about is the concept of killing your darling, whether there were characters or scenes that you had to, that you absolutely loved but just weren't working, they weren't serving the novel. Did you have anything like that? Are you able to talk about that?
Yeah, the scene that the bit that I mentioned about Nash, I mean, I don't know how well you remember it. Remember, he first got sort of, he and Jessie met out on the road while he was rescuing a turtle, and they end up having sex in front of the fireplace a few minutes later, or a short time afterwards. And then I had another scene where they sort of got together again, and my editor thought it was being a bit repetitive. so I chopped it out, but it in fact changed. Like, it was how he got captured. Remember, he escaped and he got captured, and it sort of changed. In the end, I had to get him captured. I had him sort of sprung again by the police, but my editor thought that was a bit corny, so I sort of scrapped that. But now, I realised afterwards, looking back at it, really changes his personality, and he seems a lot more sort of fractured and wounded than I had him in the first draft.
Yeah, okay.
And you seem to quite like him, so maybe it was a good move anyway. I don't know.
But I'm happy to see him have more agency in the next one as well, though.
Oh, good.
That's where you can show us that actually, he's tough as well.
Yeah, maybe.
But I did think he balanced Jessie out quite well.
Oh, good. Yeah. She's a bit of an isolated character, isn't she, Jessie? Just runs around doing her own thing.
Yeah, but yet she's still got lots of mates. She can still call in lots of favors when she needs to.
Yeah, she does, doesn't she? Yeah, she's a bit of a character as well. I hope you get to read Old Emily one of these days, because she was even more of a character. My first person, Emily Tempest.
Yeah, we'll have to see if we can get that one in, because I saw that they were with a different publishing house.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have to see if they're still available.
Oh, I don't think. Yeah, they should be. Yeah, they seem to be. Yeah, I know my local bookshop keeps them in stock as a favour.
Oh, beauty. Okay, that means they should be then. Excellent. I'll look into that. And then we've already kind of touched on it, but what sort of next for you? You're working on another Jessie novel. Do you have anything else in the work, or is it kind of, you do one project, split that?
I'm actually this is part of my problem. I'm trying to do two projects at once. Yeah, I had this massive, like, there are some non-fiction, right? And I've written one non-fiction book myself, King Lake 350, about the Black Saturday fires. But I had an idea for a non-fiction book that I wanted to do for years, inspired by people like Simon Winchester or Bill Bryson, who seem to be able to write really brilliant, engaging books about non-fictional topics. And I started work once, and I did a little bit more work on a thing. I was sort of, my working title for it was a dictionary of fire, that is. And I wanted to sort of try and, because there isn't really such a thing, or maybe even an encyclopedia of fire was actually I was calling it, to bring it all. Well, I've been a firefighter for about 15 years now, and I've got this idea. I don't quite know whether it's fiction or non-fiction. I'm sort of, I've been doing a lot of research for it, and I have a lot of ideas. And I seem to vary what month it is, but sometimes it's a fiction book, but and other times it's like sort of an imaginative encyclopedia, and maybe what was I thinking of? So what's it called? It's Italo Calvino book, Invisible Cities. That's it. You know that book? Amazing book. And I mean, basically, for those who haven't seen it, it's this, what's his name? Marco Polo in the court of the Chinese emperor, telling him stories about all the different worlds that he's encountered in his travels. And as you gradually get further and further into the book, you realize that all he's doing is sort of describing different sort of dream aspects of his own town of Venice. And there are all these amazing worlds he creates. And I've got this idea of trying to do something like that, but it's quite a major thing. So I sort of told my publishers I'd sort of knock off another novel in the current crime series while I was working on that one. But I've sort of got all a bit mixed up in my head, so I'm not quite sure what's going on really. But I've got to finish this next Jesse Redpath book in the next year or so. So the other one I'll put on hold for a little while. But I've been doing a bit of reading, a bit of crazy thinking about that one as well.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's something to look forward to, though.
Yeah,
bit of a genre blend.
Maybe, yeah.
Excellent. Now we are nearly at time. So what I'd love to do is maybe you would treat us to a reading. Is there a passage from the novel?
Sure. I'm glad you. Right, I had my book sitting here, but I'd lost track of it. Okay, I just thought I'd read a bit from near the end. This was my daughter's suggestion, since it came from one of my radical greenie daughter, sort of sometimes climbing up trees and things to stop them being chopped down. And she and the bit that I'm about, I've never done this, but she described to me having done this. So this is near the end of the book, when Jessie climbs up this massive mountain ash to get a look over the valley and get a bit of a better perspective of things. So this is Jessie describing it. I've sort of climbed a few trees, but nothing like my daughter's done. As I descended into the crown, I began to understand why botanists call the upper canopy the eighth continent. So this is Jessie climbing up a mountain ash. The higher you got, the more things changed. Birds and beetles looked at me astonished. The background noise took on a different tone, a low, persistent thrum. A swarm of strange insects, caterpillars, green ants, weevils, crunched and crawled through the leafwork. A spider floated in from God knows where and ran its web across my face. A big-eyed praying mantis froze millimeters from my nose, scrutinized me, then slowly backed into a camouflaging branch. I wondered if I was the first human ever to be here. Looking down at the forest below, I was struck by how tessellated its structure was when observed from this angle. The trees maintained their distance from each other, but worked in groups, gathering in geometrical patterns, maximizing their exposure to light, minimizing wind. There's a term for this phenomenon, canopy shyness. I'd heard of it, but I'd never seen it so clearly before.
Beautiful, thank you. I can see it. It's absolutely incredible when you see that from above, isn't it? The canopy shyness. Yeah.
You do know it. I'd never actually heard of it till my daughter pointed it out to me.
I've read a few Peter Wallenben books. He loves to tree canopies.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
Alrighty. Now we do have a roving mic. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask? Because the roving mic will essentially pick it up for the recording. Anyone? Oh, might have a shy group tonight. I'm sorry, Adrian.
Right.
Anyone? Or have I asked all of it?
Probably.
Oh, I exhausted everything. I'm sorry.
Covered all the salient points.
Oh, yes, Anne-Marie has one. Hold on.
I suppose I'm interested in the cover.
Anne-Marie
who chose
cover.
who chose your cover? And I just noticed the book that you've written before, which I haven't read, is a very similar cover.
Yeah.
Is there a theme going on that the next one will also be the same cover?
Yeah, I imagine there will be. Actually, I was just telling someone the other day the covers of these books are better than the contents of them. The covers are so nice. No, but I don't know. It's by someone who's associated with Ultimo, and I thanked him in the acknowledgements. And he did a great job, but I've forgotten his name off the top of my head. Oh, there it is, Josh Durham, whoever he is. If anyone in the audience is looking at getting someone to design their books, he's your man.
Exactly. Will he be doing the third one, presumably?
I haven't got that far yet, but I hope so.
Hopefully, fingers crossed.
Yeah, they do. Ultimo do give you some input into it, and they've done a wonderful job, I think.
Yeah, it's funny. We sort of seem to hear different things about how much agency authors have over their covers.
Yeah, all the books that I've done, the publishers they've always at least cleared it with you first.
Yeah, excellent. Well, that's good. Any other questions?
Sorry to scare. Is anyone there? Anyone still awake there? I can't see them.
I promise they are. Alrighty. Well, thank you so much then, everyone. We'll I'll get you all to really shout out big thanks. We'll see if the microphones pick it up.
Is that it? I didn't hear it, but that's okay. Not really, no, but that's okay.
Applause.
Yeah, oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming along. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming along tonight. I do have copies of the Wiregrass and Canticle Creek available for sale if you missed out on a copy and you'd like to grab a copy. And then I also have next month's read. We'll be reading My Brilliant Sister by Amy Brown. So another Aussie author, she'll be zooming into us. So that will be last Wednesday of next month, and I've got copies of that available as well. All righty. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And thank you for your interest in the book, and thank you to all of the audience for reading it and coming along as well. Thank you.
Thank you. All righty. Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.